We acknowledge that we are joined here today, taking residence on the original lands of the Shawnee, Lenni Lenape, Ottawa, Miami, Wyandot, and Seneca Cayuga peoples. It is necessary to understand and truly honor the sacred value this land holds to indigenous nations. This is not past tense. These tribes were eventually and forcibly removed from Ohio. We must sit with the discomfort of our historical context and that this colonialism is ongoing, not just a mark on the past, continually manifested in environmental devastation, the disproportionate rate of missing murdered Native women, poverty and illness, and land treaty injustice. We pay our respects not just by acknowledgement, which is a first step, but by committing ourselves to further education, awareness, and involvement. Please welcome to the stage Carlos Marshall.
Greetings. My name is Carlos L. Marshall, and I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer and Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Dayton Metro Library. Whether you are joining us virtually or in person, I welcome you all with open arms and minds to Black Futures 2.0. May this fruitful conversation challenge us to learn and unlearn while acknowledging our ancestral past, present, and future. This afternoon, may we speak our authentic, personal, and collective truths related to the plight and promise of being Black in America. May we envision Black futures that is free of redlining, book bans of our stories, disproportionate rates of incarceration, inequitable health care, the denial of educational opportunities and economic upward mobility, state-sanctioned violence, and so much more, both here, at home, and abroad. On behalf of the library, thank you to our esteemed panelists in advance for the opportunity, and thank you also to the Urban Creative Arts, Sinclair College, and Signature Educational Solutions for the opportunity to partner on this special program. This is to Black excellence that is not rooted in Black elitism, and/or Black exploitation. And with that, I bring to you Sierra Leone. I say.
Good morning and welcome. Our journey with the Black Futures movement started a little over a year after Kimberly Drew and Jenna Wortham edited and published a collection of Black moments, thoughts through essays, interviews, art, photography, poems, tweets, memes, and more. In the early spring of 2021, artists, educators, entrepreneurs, community partners, and students of all academic levels gathered at the time when we could not come together in person for the home of Urban Creative Arts Healing and Performance Symposium. That event birthed Black Futures. And it was through that experience that we defibrillated local urban creative culture and supported community artists during a pivotal time of social, racial, cultural, and political reckoning. Patina Love said, "Being a person of color is a civic project because of our relationship with America." Our work is reconnecting with mattering to ourselves, our families, community, and country. Over the years, I have learned that authentically honoring my heritage as a community collaborator diminishes human hierarchy and strengthens our connection to each other and the world around us. Again, we see you. We are so thankful that you are here.
Think of a Black future. At my age, I look to all of you with your wonderful passion and expertise. You and others like yourselves are the key to fulfillment of what Langston Hughes pined for when he penned, "Oh, let America be America again, the land it has never been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free." When I think of a black future, I think of my mother, a 2-year-old child when the family home in Tulsa, Oklahoma was burned to the ground in the 1921 race massacre, leaving herself, 2 sisters, and mother, my grandmother, homeless. A vision of a black future allowed Tulsa, Greenwood, to recover and thrive again. My mom was deeply impacted by Black Wall Street, a place where greatness was concentrated, a place where most of her teachers had PhDs because of that concentration, a place where she saw dozens of black doctors, lawyers, teachers, nurses, and business owners, a place with over 600 businesses, including 30 restaurants and many churches. This clear view of a black future enabled a proud, unapologetic black woman to instill pride in her 3 children, so much so that growing up, I felt sorry for my white friends because they were not black. Because I was exposed to and taught about black greatness every day, equipped with knowledge of Martin Luther King Jr., Ella Baker, Baird Rustin, Malcolm X, Shirley Chisholm, Willie Mays, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Sidney Poitier, Lena Horne, Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, Lerone Bennett, Ebony, Jet, and of course, Soul Train. My dad understood a black future when he explained to me that patriotism is loving a great country when it has not loved you back, in hopes that your children and grandchildren will experience the full citizenship that white Americans have. An uncompromising vision of a black future led my mother to question my desire to go to college after I brought home a C in geometry. She knew I could do better and demanded no less than my best. She saw what my future could be. In spite of all that they had seen, my mom in Tulsa and a life as a domestic, and my dad as a veteran who served in the segregated military and was denied many of the benefits of the GI Bill. You see, they were optimists. They understood the Thomas Friedman quote before he even coined it. Pessimists are usually right, and optimists are usually wrong, but all great things are accomplished by optimists. In seeing a black future, my parents refused to be shattered by circumstance, and they insisted that we not expect equality and justice, but to demand it. You see, there's a subtle difference. Expecting equality and justice takes the power out of our hands. It is dependent on whether someone is willing to give it or not. There's an expectation that the one we're dealing with will be reasonable and deal with us in good faith. Demanding equality and justice comes from a mindset of what one will or will not accept, regardless of whether the other party operates in good faith or not. Look at it this way. Rodney Veal can expect me to pay him back the money that I owe him. Or he can demand that I pay the money I owe him. With demanding, he's letting me know that he's going to see this through until I pay him back. Many of you heard me talk about my mentor, James Brown, not the James Brown, but James Brown from Middletown, Ohio, who saw a different black future for me than I saw. Everyone has a purpose. I thought mine was coaching basketball. He believed that I was called to do something else and told me that I needed to go into administration and impact the whole building instead of 33 players. He told me that coaching was noble, but he saw a different path for me. Mr. Brown asked me, how many of the people who make decisions and set policy look like the students we serve? You've got to switch that passion you have for coaching and teaching and transition it to leading in a different way. Following his advice is the most important professional decision I could have ever made. That vision of a black future led parents Tyrone and Cherie Curtis to design their daughter Taylor's high school path to be one of taking all college courses, allowing her to earn an associate's degree at 17 years of age, then a bachelor's and a master's degree, later becoming the youngest tenured professor in the country. Vision of a Black Future allowed a Sinclair professor, Dr. Kathy Rao, to see the potential in a bright young student, Amaha Selassie, take him under her wing and mentor him to be a powerful voice for social justice in this community. I look at this distinguished panel and audience to be the Black Future. So many, for so long, we've worried about living in harmony, getting along with and embracing one another, when the focus should be on eliminating the political power and divisiveness of the labels black, white, and brown. A Black Future is understanding that we are not monolithic, but represent many powerful, distinct stories that must be shared with others, and especially with our children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and those we mentor. Those stories are of strength, courage, resilience, triumph, and determination, and have often been suppressed and hidden. But the genie's out of the bottle now, and these stories will be told. Standing on the shoulders of giants builds a Black Future, and it takes foresight and vision, which is infinitely better than hindsight. Later, my dear friend Sierra Leone will lead you in an exercise for you to examine what you will commit to do in creating a Black Future. And I think this quote by Zora Neale Hurston is appropriate for me to close with. The present is an egg laid by the past that has the future inside its shell. By knowing and embracing our history, let's all fervently strive for a Black Future in the now. Peace and blessings. Thank you.
Who professionally acts as the Chief Diversity Officer at Sinclair Community College, or maybe communally as a Black man. We definitely appreciate you sharing your wisdom, offering inspiration, and providing hope. So when you get to hear the challenge that Sierra gives at you all at the end, we really do hope that you take it seriously. And our next part will be actually taken for Scott, that will take this part of the program. So we appreciate you and all of how you give of yourself. Thank you again, Mr. Carter.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. I hope that everyone can hear me in this moment. I regret that I could not be there with you in person. But Columbus is holding on the Black Future as well, right? Yes. So wherever we are, so is the future. So thank you for inviting me back. I absolutely adored doing this last year, so I appreciate the invitation to return. And before we get into the business, I want to give a shout out to everybody who is working on the back end, right? The library, the volunteers, the IT. Without y'all, this conversation is not possible today. So going into this part of the conversation, into the conversation proper, I just want to say a couple things to kind of just lay the tone, I guess. I am a lightweight pessimist. Right? So Michael Carter's Keynote had a rock or two in there that hit me, but I'm not hollering, right? Anybody is not 100% without hope, right? You may be without faith, you may be without some other things, but work requires hope. That is the only way that you can get the energy to affect change. And so, we are a stage full of workers, which means this is a room and a platform filled with hope, right? Regardless of background, regardless of qualification, regardless of the work that we are doing that may be different but aligned. And so I'm really looking forward to throwing some questions onto the table having some conversations about those things. I try not to get into too many arguments at this stage of my life. I say that knowing that I love arguing, right? But every argument is an ounce of energy that I am not spending on the work that would otherwise prove whatever point I am trying to prove. So I and everyone else here today is present in the interest of work and in the interest of the future, right? And so I'm just gonna kind of jump in here. I've got a bunch of questions that we will not get through, but we will endeavor to at least delve into some of them as deeply as we can get, right? I would much rather we get into a few deeply than a bunch shallow, right? But
Yes.
I do want to begin with one that I think kind of sets things up, and the panelists should not feel beholden to answer every question that is lobbed, right? But I would like to kind of lay the foundation of what do you think it means to be Black in 2022 that it did not mean in 2021? How has that changed just in the last year, in your opinion, or your experience? And I put that to the floor, and then if I have to start picking people specifically, I will. It's kind of family.
He's a school teacher.
I'll
go.
Rodney.
You see me? Being Black in 2022 versus 2021 for me is being 100% unapologetic in word, thought, deed, action, and truly being your authentic self in all the spaces that we show up and occupy, really no longer assimilating to what the status quo is.
Wow.
Very good.
Yes. I know we're all looking at each other. Why should I be shy? I'm on a TV show. Well, in 2022, it is a vast difference, especially from a cultural standpoint, that the types of opportunities to be creative have changed. The doors and opportunities that didn't previously exist for reasons that we can go into in greater detail have been opened up to people of color. The cultural institutions and the cultural gatekeepers realize that they cannot tell a complete story of American culture and art without people of color. So now, as creatives, I say, if you are not creating and making work that's in your narrative, that's in your lane, so to speak, of existence, then you are not taking advantage of what opportunities are there now. Show us your work. I want to see great art from great Black people.
I'm going to piggyback on Rodney. And I would say that in 2022, mind you, it's just 2 months in, but I think one of the great things also is that we're seeing this approach that is now requiring for, in history, to be more inclusive of people of color. When we're telling this story, people who've been historically left out for a myriad of reasons, but there is now a much more dedicated approach, at least that we see publicly, the public reaching out to say, what are our stories? And more importantly, also, how are we going to preserve those? How are we going to archive those? Who's telling our story? What does it look like? So when Ryan is saying, you're being, in 2022, 100% unapologetically Black, however that is that you define yourself, I think that becomes even more important when we look at who's telling our history, how is that history being represented, who's archiving it, and people who look like us to go into those fields, because it's not enough for us just to teach it, but to move it beyond the ivory tower, or as Dr. Nathan Hare would say, the ebony tower. Move it beyond that to the public, because as one of my mentors from Columbia used to say, Dr. Manning Marable, rest in peace, if the people at 125th and Lenox don't know what we're doing, they're not understanding what our results are. This is problematic. And so we have to make sure that our work is transitioning behind these traditional modes into who it can really impact and affect. And that's where history and the arts and education have become so much more important, I would think, for 2022 than maybe what we've seen.
Right.
And I think the pandemic definitely shows us that.
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation, and I'm trying to think like how I have been impacted and how what I see around me, and even like listening to the panelists, I would say that that it's not that like we're creating a black future, but I think black is the future, and we're starting to see that more and more. And what I mean by that is that like the underlying assumption that one group of human beings are superior to another is crumbling. And instead of like begging and pleading to enter a door, we're creating our own doors.
Exactly.
And we're inviting everybody into that space, right? So we're being an invitation into how to come into our full humanity. And I'm seeing that shift more and more, and the hope that is generating across, differences of how we can like really leverage our gifts and talents, understand we are a single garment of destiny, and truly move forward. But like even like as Ryan was saying, like you see the praxis of it more, right? You see like moving from idea to actualization right now, and that gives me more hope because kind of going off what was mentioned earlier, like power is realizing our hope, right? And then that realized hope brings more power as we're bringing more of our gifts to the center. So I'm seeing more and more groups emerging and gifts being activated for the benefit of humanity.
Oh, absolutely.
Very much so.
I think in the same vein with what Amaha is saying is that there's an authenticity, as was mentioned before, that is also moving into accountability, even within our own culture and within our own groups. And I think that accountability is where that power is really being kind of concentrated in a way that can really have momentum and move forward, because we're now in a space of even recognizing when it's checking the box and recognizing when there's real motion and real action that's moving our community forward.
Right. Yep.
I love that. I'll just add too, and this is building off of what everyone has said. The most beautiful thing I see is a movement away from this kind of scarcity mentality, where we've all grown up with. Some of us have experienced what folks say and I guess pop culture, this crabs in a barrel kind of thing. There's only one of us allowed, so if you're trying to get up, I'm gonna kick you back down. But with this wealth of opportunities, with this ability to be our full authentic selves, with that being celebrated, right, and valued. I mean, I grew up going to a majority white school, and that was not valued unless I was sagging my pants and I knew the words to the rap songs. That's what they valued. That's what my friends loved me for. But that wasn't really me, right? And now who I am and the things that I hold dear are celebrated and valued. And I think what we see is, I don't know if it's just in 2021 to 2022, but I've seen this movement over the past few years. I absolutely love to see the way that we hold space for one another, the way that we make room for one another.
Yes.
When we get a contract and they say, I need a graphic designer, we say, I know just who to call, and we call our friend. When they say, I need somebody who can lay concrete or whatever, I probably didn't even say that right. I say, I know just who to call. And we're not afraid to hold space and to create these pathways for one another. And I think that's just a beautiful thing.
That's right.
Did we get everybody that wanted to jump on that one? Excellent. So, kind of extending on some of the things that were said in response to that, I want to kind of tackle this notion of space. What kind of space we are creating it and how we are creating it, right? In very concrete and practical terms. So, from your perspective, and I'm going to float this one to the group again because we did so well on the first one. Are we utilizing, technology, social media, art, culture, education, business innovation? Are we using those in ways that create or reclaim space in a way that is working? Is it working?
So Scott, are you asking if technology and sort of the current, I call them tools. The current tools by which we can express and relay information. I think it's for the fact that it's universal. The entire globe, different generations, different races, ethnicities, and sexual orientation. You can now express yourself in ways that those stories were not previously told. I think that helped in many ways once we made this transition in 22, that when the institutions, the spaces that we hold dear for culture, realized that there was lacking material that really wasn't truly representative, that there was actually a place to go to find those voices and discover the histories that had not previously been conveyed. And so I feel like those are the best tools ever. I think they're one of the things that I always think about is, like, I think about fashion, and fashion to me is an art form. The fact that the biggest practitioners of the art form, one who recently passed away, Virgil Abloh, was the head designer of menswear for Louis Vuitton. Now everyone's walking around with the LV bags or the copies, but they are however you want to float it. But the recognition that he was altering what it meant aesthetically, what was desirable. And that meant, by in turns, what people desired was created by black hands. See, therein lies the rub. What people wanted and crave is created by black creatives. I find that very fascinating. So that I feel like technology has helped that conversation faster and much more exponentially. We're seeing some really amazing artists who are doing things, and I just go down rabbit holes. Finding artists because I'm like, I got to get this on the show. How do I get this on the show? People need to know that this exists. So that's my answer.
Yeah, that's deep. I'm kind of just thinking of something I've been thinking on lately. And then you add this piece about desirable, because I've been building up this notion of, like, what is compelling. Going off that Buckminster Fuller quote that Peter Beckendorf always uses about how instead of dismantling the current structures, how do we build something new, a new space, right? So compelling that it makes the old obsolete. So I've been questioning with, like, what is this compelling, right? And what is this? How do we heighten the contradiction? Like what is the desirable? You know what I mean? And so to me, like, physically, like geography-wise, right, structures or spaces are ideas that we put our resources to. So we have an idea, and then we use our resources, time, gifts, and talents towards birthing that, right? So I look at, like, what is the prevailing idea? Like, and I'm hearing from the audience or from the panelists and audience, interdependence, right? This notion that instead of looking at independent and the crabs in the barrel mentality, we're shifting towards more cooperation, right? Because the more that we understand that we have a shared future, then the more it's like, okay, how do we cooperate together towards co-creating that future that we're moving in towards? And so I see us, shifting from being recipients to protagonists in creating that space, but I don't think we're fully utilizing all the tools at our disposal, especially me. I'm learning a lot. I'm like so many things I'm not using towards creating this space, both in a social way and then in a geographical way. But I think we're making strides towards making these authentic spaces possible now, more than we have in a long time.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here real quick just so I can get someone's very specific perception. Lakeisha, having, so rich a business background, I'm curious as to how you kind of see that play out in that realm.
So one of the things for me is we are making significant strides because we are creating spaces in multiple ways for one another. So we're creating spaces from the aspect of jobs, right? When you think of that, we are creating jobs. We are creating the ability to create our own thing. But in that, we are also creating the space of not having to rely on others. And that in itself is empowering, because for so long, and don't get me wrong, we are still inching our way away from this. So
Right.
we still have a ways to go. But in that creation, we are also looking at the ability to kind of say, I don't want or I don't need this other element, this other source. We're able to move away from sources that we had to depend on for so long, with us creating not only jobs for other individuals, jobs for ourselves. Now I'm going to get a little pessimistic for a second. It's not necessarily a crabs in a barrel, but I think one thing that we need to do that will press us further will acknowledge and push. I'm hoping you all can still hear me. Is to acknowledge and push that there's more than one way to do everything. There's more than one answer to everything. So we don't have to just be one thing. And I think that, kind of tiptoeing into what you asked in the first question, we have a bad habit of siloing ourselves into one space at a time. We have to be this, or we have to be this, or we have to do it this way. And what I'm beginning to see is that we're acknowledging that that's not true. And I think that space is the one that's truly going to get us where we need to be. Once we understand that we don't have to just be a tradesman, or just be an entrepreneur, or just be, and these are just examples, or just go to college, but we can do all of those, or we can do one of those, and all of them can produce and does produce excellence. And that's the space that I'm beginning to see us speak to more, and that's the one that I'm really excited about, because that provides us so many more options when we stop looking at it as only do this to get here. Like, I didn't know that about Taylor, and I think that that's phenomenal. Like, Taylor and herself, I feel like, is an example of that numerous pieces of space that she's standing in at one time. So yeah.
Good, thanks.
Excellent. So I kind of want to, it's hard for me to see who's on the panel, because you see us individually, but I see like 6 of y'all very far away. Where is Whitney?
She over here.
Hey, okay. So Whitney, I would like to kind of pose that to you directly as well. Considering, your work in incubating and working with businesses and nonprofits, like how do you interpret that as well?
When I think about spaces, I see a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs. I think we're in a place now where you asked a question earlier about how does being Black in 2022 differ than 2021. And I think people are more intentional about taking care of themselves. And a part of taking care of yourself is being intentional about the spaces that you occupy. And I think now we have such an opportunity to be a part of different things. Like Lakeisha said, we don't have to be in a silo. We can be a part of different groups. We can implement our own groups. And I think that's what I kind of see with entrepreneurship, is truly an opportunity to create those spaces that you weren't able to see or maybe fit in before. So that will be my response to your question.
Thank you. I got like one eye on y'all, one eye on questions, and my third eye on the time. And so I do want to get I want to get a real specific question in here that I think, some of us will have a take on, and one of us will have a particular take on, that being the Reverend Ward. But this is to me, this is a really powerful and important question as we do any kind of work that involves kind of where Black people have been, where Black people are, and where Black people are going. And that is, how do we see the role of the Black church in the future? Understanding that the Black church has had a very specific and historical and powerful and impactful and foundational role where our people are concerned, regardless of where we were at, regardless of what we were doing, and that has changed right? That has changed. The priority of the church, the call of the church, the usefulness of the church in some places has changed. And then as we obviously move into the future, that will continue to evolve. And so I do want to propose that to at least a panel, but I do not, if I may, I do not want Reverend Joshua Ward to answer that first.
Yes, I was just about to ask if we could ask somebody else to answer first.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, because I'm here to learn, so I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. So I'm happy to float that first to, I'm just going to pick somebody who was dope with the resume. If Karen, if you wouldn't mind, maybe taking the lead on that.
Who'd he say?
Karen.
You sound like, who'd he say? Oh, okay. Why, sure, Scott. So I think when we look at it, and I'm speaking now from a historical standpoint, specifically when it comes to African American church, the church has been such a foundation when we look at where African Americans had been. And I'm just saying it from a standpoint of a traditional, as of now, let's say from an English standpoint of colonialism, a la 1619. I'm not going to use St. Augustine, which is Spanish, but anyway, that's 1500s. But the reality is that, when Christianity is introduced for many Africans to practice in this land, whether it be America / going into the United States, we've seen that these have been hubs where people were allowed to have a spiritual relationship with something higher than themselves. Now, that's not to discount how they practiced, that they didn't keep traditional African spiritual systems, but from a Christian standpoint, what we call a church, we see that the church evolves from something that may be hidden or secret in the woods. It could be something that's just collective among themselves in certain land tracts, till we see that eventually, of course, after Reconstruction, that they'll start their own churches. And what these churches look like, from whether it's Richard Allen, who's going to, of course, start considered to be the first black church that's here in the United States, to up to the present, the church has been able to meet so many different needs. And so historically, what we're looking at, it's not just spiritual. We're talking about, when we look at most of our educational institutions, that's where they're going to be housed, in basements of churches or in these one room type of church spaces that will actually occupy also a school setting. And so we also see churches evolve, because one of the things that we do know economically, that many persons of color, we'll just say black, or for this time period, you couldn't get a loan anywhere, And so you had churches that were in effect like credit unions. And so when we start to see the spaces, as you talked about earlier, where many black men don't have a position that they could say that would be of honor or something that may be upwardly mobile. They had a space inside the church. And, sexism, of course, does prevail in many of these spaces. But inside the church, we saw where men had a certain type of authority, And when we see, for a black community perspective, post-Vietnam era, there's a decline in that black male presence in the churches, We see a rise of single-parent households that's reared by women. And even in that instance, women are bringing their families to the church. So we see this schism that the church is still trying to deal with even today. There's a question, not so much is it valuable, but the question of how can it meet so many needs that the black community does have, which are good things. And so when we look at this institution, the church has historically and presently been a backbone in many aspects for the black community, from credit to employment opportunities, pantry for foods, information for healthcare, on best how to live your life, all these different types of functions. So where we see it going in the future, because everything evolves and the church has to evolve too, if it's going to be viable to the people that it serves.
If I could, thank you so much, Karen.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Scott.
If I could just tap Ryan real quick on this directly, just because I know, we're talking a bit about how the church serves, right? how the work of the church, either traditionally or currently, or maybe into the future, can serve, has served, or can serve. And I know that your background, dealing in, social work, that kind of thing, speaks directly to the kind of needs that traditionally maybe the church has addressed, but maybe they do or don't any longer. And I don't know if maybe moving into the future, we should be looking to the church for that. Exactly. I don't know if you might have a take on that.
Sure, thank you. So for me, the Black church has been a foundation for Black people for their spiritual needs. It's been the safe space for in times of trouble, need, any of your spiritual needs. But as we evolve as a people and we talk about being our authentic selves, to me, the Black church needs to be a 100% safe space and begin to be more open to the things in the Black community that we have considered taboo or that we don't talk about, namely mental health, number one.
Exactly.
Homosexuality. The church is a safe space. And so how can you come into this safe space, but you're not fully accepted or you're made to feel that you're wrong because for whatever reason. So I think the church needs to evolve and grow, and some churches are. They're getting there. Some it's cultural, it's ingrained, and so they just have to move forward and do the work. But I see it happening. But collectively, I think they need to reach out to people in those spaces to say, hey, what do we need to do to be more inclusive, to make this a safe space? And I think it can happen.
And then maybe just to round it out, Reverend Ward, if you want to kind of jump in here.
Yeah, so I'll be happy to. I'll share a little bit about my own personal theology, if you will, that will inform, I think, my answer to the question. There's a scripture, and I promise I'm not going to preach. I'm not going to take text, verse and chapter. There's a scripture where a teacher in the law comes to Jesus and says, "Great teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And asks, "What is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus' response is really simple. He says, "Love God with everything you have. Love your neighbor as you love yourself." That's my personal theology. The Bible is a really, really long book with a lot of words and a lot of chapters and a lot of verses and a lot of instructions and a lot of things that all help to inform what that looks like, I believe, and teach us what that looks like and how to do that. But for me, I think that we have to prioritize these two things for the church to be relevant in any age, right? And to make impact. Another time there are folks talking to Jesus and they say, "When will the kingdom of God come? Where there'll be signs? How do we know when it's here?" And Jesus says, "The kingdom is within you." Yeah. It's not going to come with signs. It's not going to come. It's not it's not going to be God just doing it. It's within you. You have to build the kingdom. You have to work to build a society that is equitable. You have to work to do the things that I say are important to me, right? And should be important to you. Whatever you do for the least of these. I'm sorry, I'm giving a whole lot of verses, but this is what informs me, and y'all invited a pastor to sit on the panel. And so, it's getting back to these things that, for me, that Jesus prioritized. And I believe that's, I hear a lot of criticism of the Black church in a lot of different spaces. And I don't want to get any arguments with folks. I think some of it is warranted. I think some of it is perception and maybe some misconception or misunderstanding, where we need these dialogues to talk about what happened and where this disconnect maybe came from with the Black community. I think part of it, what we see is that in those early years of the church, even up through the civil rights movement, the folks who attended the church lived in the neighborhood where the church was located. The church has always had, I believe, a responsibility and a priority. The Black church, we've always had to do more than just be a spiritual safe space. Absolutely. We've always had to be a community center. We've always had to work to feed the hungry around us. We've always had to work to be a resource for the community. And I think when the community was also the congregation, that was easier. Now we have to take care of the congregation, and also many of the folks in the congregation do not live in the community. And what happened, I don't think it was intentional in most cases, but what happened was this separation where we became disconnected from the communities in which we are located. And so we've got work to do in the future to, I think, restore those connections. That's some of the work that I'm thankful to stand on the shoulders of my parents, who pastored the church that I now pastor for 31 years. And they believed wholeheartedly in being a church in the community and for the community and of the community. And they've worked hard to build some programs and institutions and the ministry around being responsive to the needs that surround us. So the church that I pastor at Omega, the membership is already ready. They're like, what are we doing next? Where are we serving? Where are we going? And so that's a blessing that I have. A lot of other pastors, particularly in my generation, who are coming into these churches because they are institutions that they're coming into. I was going to chime into the question about how are we utilizing the tools and technology and all of that. I think if you're just creating something, it's easy to say we're going to do it online and do all of this. With churches, what we learned in the pandemic is you've got to lead the people there, because there's this whole institution that you have to figure out how to sometimes inform the culture of, sometimes figure out how to lead them in a direction. But I think absolutely, I think it's back to where we were, being again, a resource for the community, being connected to the community. And that's not always jumping out in front and leading. Sometimes that is finding out where God is working and joining those who are doing that work and supporting that.
You know, if I can hop in, something interesting you made me think about is, I can't remember who said it, but someone in the 1800s, how they said that the black church was going to be like the saving of America. You know what I mean? Because like I think there's the institution, and even like Gym City Market, a lot of our early meetings was birthed at Omega, right? But then also like looking at like the gospel itself, you know what I mean? And like being rooted in love. You know, no more Jew, Greek, and Gentile. Come on. The foot can't tell the hand doesn't need it. Hand can't tell the head don't need it. You know what I mean? It's like how we live out the gospel. You know, I think is a paramount thing, that it's not just a black thing, but definitely the African American community who has experienced so much hatred and denial of their humanity. Now we're in the position to offer grace and forgiveness to help move humanity forward. You know what I mean? And so it's like how we do that in a way that's constructive. You know what I mean? So like I just want to throw that in, because I think there's the institution, then there's the gospel itself, right? And we got to talk about both. You know?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think following up on that, Amaha, I think one of the things that often we don't get is exactly what Reverend Ward was talking about, this idea of Sankofa, to go back to what's at risk of being left behind. And if we go all the way back to the earliest churches, those were in Africa, in Ethiopia. That wasn't in Europe. You know what I mean? So we go back to the origin, and we go back to really understanding. And I think we have to now separate out this colonialism, separating out these ideologies that have been added to. And when we do that as a black church, and we start to consider culture and historical context, and start to look at things from a totally different perspective, we get back to that root of community, that root of being collectivistic, that root of us needing to move forward, and that space of spirituality where we're reenacting the things that our ancestors did, the call and response, the way that we're speaking, the way that we worship. All of these things go back to our roots. And so if we just return to that space, and we return to that mentality, and centering how we love as a community and how we operate in that interdependence that you were talking about earlier, I think that is where the black future of the church can really restore and be restorative in the way that we were impactful in the community once before. We can be just as impactful now. And that collectivism, like Ryan was saying, is where we now eliminate some of those barriers and some of those taboos and some of those spaces where we don't embrace one another, where we recognize that we're all operating in the same faith, in the same walk, in the same ideology that we all need each other to be better, that we all need to work together to get to wholeness, and that requires us to go backwards.
Thank you, everyone. It would be remiss of me on a personal level to not pose this next question. And I know exactly who I'm going to kick it to. This one's going to be for Rodney, at least initially. And the question is, and I want to change this question a lot, because this question gets asked a lot, but I think it gets asked wrong. Okay? And so the way that the question is usually asked is, what is the role of the Black artist, regardless of their discipline, today? Meaning, to their community, in response to their community, in response to social issues, in response to justice. And the reason why I respectfully suggest that question is incorrect is because it lays an assumption on Black artists, right? It lays an assumption that is what Black artists generally are in the game for, right?
Right.
I work with artists of all disciplines in my work, and I can tell you, that most of them, and this is true everywhere, just want to do art, right? And so if they activate into justice, if they activate into frontline social work, if they activate into issues, that's a plus, but it's not a given.
Right.
So, but I do want to kind of float the question to you, what is the role of the Black artist? Who chooses to do that, right? Is there a way that we can define what that role is?
Okay, that's a big question. But it's a necessary question, because I think, me personally, as a working artist and as someone who's also an advocate for other artists, who's an advocate for institutions to do the work that needs to be done, we take all of that into consideration. That being said, I always feel the responsibility of the artist is to be authentically who they are, which is not having to deal with the burden and expectations of a wider mainstream culture to create the work that they deem acceptable, or the message that they want to hear from you. Because that in and of itself, as someone who trained in the arts in the 1980s as a visual artist, that was one of the problems I encountered. Was that, why are you not talking about the suffering of Black folks? And I said, I'm sorry, I grew up middle class on a farm and I didn't suffer. So therefore, why are you asking me to carry that burden in my artwork? I just want to paint and draw. Why do I need to be the representation of a Black suffering in a performative sense to my white peers and my white colleagues and professors and advisors? So I think that's an unnecessary, unfair burden on the artist. That being said, if they choose to take on that mantle, I say more power to you. And it goes back to what Whitney said earlier about the multiplicity of the Black experience. It's not monolithic. And so therefore, what we're finding is that the narrow definition comes from the institutions and the cultural gatekeepers. They only want to see us as suffering. There was an interesting and there's an interesting phrase that I'm learning to use, and it's just something I learned. We are not descendants of slaves. We're a descendant from enslaved people.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is a very different take, which means that our culture, our craft, our abilities to do, our intellectual capacities are far greater than the mainstream gives us credit for. So I think for the artist, I feel very strongly about that the artist needs to do what they need to do unencumbered by the weight and expectations of society. But we have to support them. And so I go back to something my mother said to me on the phone this morning, because she asked me the question about what I was doing today. And because she said, you're always doing something. You're always I'm on the board of 5 nonprofits. Okay, that's a lot of work. So on top of my day job, I have so many hats. People always joke about that. But there's a phrase that came into my head that my father told me, and that was, if you are not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yep.
So, for the longest time, I did not use my voice because I wanted to be pleasant and sort of acceptable in passing. I think what has happened in 21, 22 is that I no longer have that filter. And that has caused some problems. And I do recognize that causes some problems. But it is also, it's good trouble. But it's also given an opportunity to say, what is my role and responsibility
Exactly.
as the artist? And also someone who is a cultural gatekeeper, which is a TV show. I now sit in the production meetings. I told them, I need to be in the production meetings. I need to decide the artwork that's hanging on the wall behind me.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the subjects. And so that we are getting true representation. So that's the role and responsibility of the artist, and I think just of Black folks in general, is that we have to be advocates for ourselves and advocate for the opportunities for others, and unapologetically. I am, as the producer of the show said, you are the face and the brand of the art show. And I do remember when we started that show that someone in this community, and when we unveiled it, and it was this, and I will not say their name, so you will not impugn someone, who said, is Rodney Veal the right person to represent art and culture in Dayton? So those little passive aggressive digs, I may not, I learned the grace to absorb it. And so I just decided to be excellent. Do it anyway. So I'm hoping that's what I'm all about. So that's my long-winded response to being an artist. That's our role. Be the warriors.
Thank you so much, Rodney. And if we had more time, I would jump right on this with you from some personal experience. But we have about maybe like 5 minutes before this goes to a Q&A, which is going to be dope, I'm sure. So I think I got time for one more question that I'm going to squeeze in, and I know exactly who that is going to.
All right.
Amaha, get ready, because it's coming in hot, okay? I want to ask you specifically because you are literally doing work and contributing to work that is literally putting food on tables, right? Putting food
Yes.
Yes.
Gym City Market.
What do we need to do today to lay the sustainable groundwork for the future of the human condition and better quality of life?
Oh, that's a heavy one.
Okay, I thought that was just going to be about the market.
All right.
I think that's a great question, and I think part of the answer is in there's a few people that are seen as the face of the market, quote unquote, but really like there's so many people in this room who've played a role in doing it, right? So I think we're talking about laying the future for the human condition. I think it comes from listening to the experience of the human condition now, and then co-creating what we want to see different from it. Because oftentimes, people that are making policy, people that are making funding decisions are separated from those who had the actual experience, right? So how are we grounding the experience in the creation of public policy, right? And of like community vision and the direction we're trying to go. And so how are we centering at the margins? And I think like how we're building a leaderful circumstances as well, right? That strong, like Ella Baker says, strong people don't need strong leaders, right? And so like I think it's shifting this notion of like how we have power in the community, and dovetailing off of what Rodney talked about, like how are we controlling our narrative, right? Like how are we putting, first things first, right? Like how are we improving access to education, healthcare, affordable housing, right? Like how are we really tackling these issues and looking at like I'm gonna go there. Sometimes we talk about the social determinants of health, right? And like which are really, and we talk about that's the root, but that's not the root. That's the outcome, right? So who's making the decisions that is then putting the resources that's getting the outcome of social health? So looking at the structural determinants of health, right? Like and who's at the table and not on the menu and all these things, right? And so like how we're building our power together to transform our lived environment and to really embed dignity inside of the structures inside of our community instead of just talking about it. So I don't know.
Yes.
Thank you. You know what? I think I might still have a few minutes left, so I'm going to float this one. I'm just going to open this one up, and we'll see who we can fit in the next 3 minutes, right? If you were speaking, let's say Well, actually, no. Let's do this different. Let me not ask a question. Let me just get everyone to contribute a last comment before we close out. That way, you're saying what you need to say. Okay? We'll just start off. Let's start off with Taylor.
In my closing comment, what I would say is everybody has a role that we all play as individuals in this big body. We all have a role, we all have a lane, and your lane may look different than the next person's lane, your expertise may look different, but it is up to you to get engaged, to get involved, and to take action in the role that you have.
That's right.
All right. Rodney, can we get you to give us a last comment?
One of the things with culture and art is it not just the maker, it is also it requires an audience. And that requires effort, which means instead of bemoaning the fact that there may not be things, there are wonderful, wonderful artists of all different genres of art, and we're talking art and culture. You need to go. You need to make the effort. Even if you're dog tired from working 2 jobs, you need to find a way to connect to the Black creatives and see their work and support it. You have that. That's the energy that they feed off of to take it to the next step and take it forward. So make the effort.
Thank you. Thank you. Ryan, if you would not mind, last thoughts.
Sure. 3 things. 1, we all have privilege, so whatever privilege you have, remember to use it responsibly, whatever space you're in at all times. 2, to seek understanding. Understanding is not agreement. Understanding is just what it is. And in gaining understanding, it opens up that Pandora's box so that you can be an effective change agent, especially when you're entrusted to make decisions for other people. And 3, something my late social work mentor told me to always remember, in whatever capacity that you're operating in, to always remember to do the most good while doing the least harm.
That's right.
Right. Wow.
Ryan, what was your mentor's name? I think it's important to put those people into the room.
He's deceased, but his name was Alan P. Kimbrough.
Yes. Thank you. Reverend Ward.
Yeah. So Ryan took it. No, I'm joking. No, seriously, I think I want to borrow a little bit from what Taylor said, and just, if I can, add my perspective on it too. This isn't to edit what you said or anything. I just want to add to it, in that I think in recognizing that we all have gifts, talents, skills, abilities, a role to play, a calling on our lives, however you want to say it, is also really to encourage us to really seek to find ways to leverage those gifts in one another as we do this work together. I've been in so many conversations with people where there really is like I don't know how best to say it. It's like putting down someone else's role. Like, that's not good enough. That's not strong enough. You're not doing enough. You know, that kind of thing. I think if we really work toward trying to figure out how we leverage all of those gifts, talents, and skills, I think, and figure out how we work together to push to the future, I think that would just be powerful beyond what we've experienced even to this date.
Thank you, Reverend. Lakeisha, if we could get final thought from you, that would be awesome.
Everybody took what I really wanted to say, so between Taylor started off, but what I really want to leave from my perspective is being unapologetically authentic. We're living in a time where being like everyone else and doing what everyone else is doing and finding a way to be a part of that is so popular that I think the most creative thing to do is to actually be what you naturally are, whether you feel like that's a nerd or lame or
Thank you.
I love that.
And I'm speaking for myself because I'm a whole square. I'm a whole square. Very But I think that being that is empowering to the people who are following all of us to know, like, you know what, that actually is okay. That looks like what I want to do, or that looks like who I am when I'm at home, and you know what, I'm going to continue to do that.
Yeah.
That's it.
Love that.
Thank you, Lakeisha. And as a fellow whole square, I feel you entirely. Whitney, if we could get, last thoughts from you, that would be amazing.
Yes, I would like to say definitely make sure that you connect to what your purpose and what your passion is. From the perspective of entrepreneurship, I always tell people it's a simultaneous journey. As you're pursuing your business, it's also good to know yourself, understand who you are. And I think there are 3 C's. I think you always have to be curious, making sure that you're seeking the information and learning how to ask the right questions, and also knowing where to get the information. So to be connected. So figuring out what those resources are to help you understand what it is that you need to do. And then I think also being conscious. By knowing yourself and understanding your values, it helps you say yes to the right opportunities and no to the distractions. So I just think it's important for us to realize that whatever we pursue, whether we're an entrepreneur, an innovator, or a creator, there's also this journey of self that you have to pursue at the same time.
That's good.
Amen.
Yes. And then to close this out, Karen, if you would just give us a last thought to take away, that would be just the cherry on top.
Well, okay. I think, of course, everybody is, from what I heard, because I had to step out, my apologies. But I think what we also have to look at is what people sacrificed for us to be in the position where we are.
Yes.
When I think of the stories that Mr. Carter shared, when I think of sacrifices my family has made, which everybody up here has had loved ones, however way they define their family, I think we have to look at what they've done for us to be in our space, and that our work honors not just us, because we do what we do, whatever that looks like, but also the opportunities that they didn't have, the sacrifices that they made so you could be in this position, and be prepared to be just as giving and sacrificing for those who follow after you. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be people you birthed. It could be, as we say in Black culture for sure, fictive kin, but we have to be prepared for this next generation. As you were saying earlier about, and this is Mr. Carter, he was talking about Zora Neale Hurston quote, or if we look at just even the principle of Sankofa, we really can't gauge where we are going forward or who we're laying a foundation for if we're not acknowledging what was done for us. And so I think it is always this kind of check-in, as you were saying, with ourselves, with the past, what's our vision, and just constant measure that, and for every small step that we might think is a small step, celebrate that too. Don't wait that it has to be some huge momentous moment, or you need an audience. You might be the audience of one. I've been at the table of one.
I've been there a couple times.
Yes. And and so just take that. Sometimes and I'm just going to say this too, it is especially hard for a person who is Black in this country. Especially hard, I feel. Whether you're a man or a woman, a child, an adult, you just have a certain peculiar set of circumstances that you have to overcome in what we look at contemporarily. And so, you have to take all those wins and be glad for people who are winning with you. Build your team.
That's it.
And then finally, to me, whenever this brother is in a room, he always kind of seems like the heart of it. And so to close it out, Amaha, if you would just hit us with final thought.
Yeah, thanks. I'm thinking about the continuity, right? Of like, sometimes we talk about this now moment, but like everybody been saying, like how like this journey towards freedom, you know what I mean? Like we're standing on our elders, right? And then how are we being that cornerstone, that milestone for what's coming next, and really realizing that we are the ones we've been waiting for. And really.
You know I was going to say that, but I said I ain't going to take a mile.
Because like, I think we really need to know our power in this hour, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And that like my biggest lesson over the last couple of years is that I study opportunity structures, and I've always seen like opportunity as being something outside of myself, and now I'm realizing that like really opportunity is how we co-create it together, right? As we're bringing our gifts and talents together, we're co-creating opportunity, we're co-creating spaces. Like even this here, there was a co-created opportunity, right? And
Exactly.
so knowing that we have the power to change and shape our future and to intentionally do it together, I guess my challenge for us all.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yes.
so much,
Well
Amara.
said. I love that. That's so true. It's so true.
That is our time. I know I'm supposed to hand the reins over. I'm just going to close it out by saying, thank you so much, Sierra, for the invitation, and keep working. Everybody, just keep working.
Yeah.
Exactly.
you,
You
Scott.
all
Thank
too.
you, Scott.
And I want those bookshelves and books. I'm so jealous.
I
I'm
know.
sitting here.
I keep staring at
I
the
gotta
book.
say
I'm
it.
like, I'm gonna-
Right. It looks like he's at
I'm looking
NPR's
at the
tiny
bass.
desk about to give a concert.
I'm looking at
Come
the
on,
upright
Scott.
bass
Let's
going,
give
wow.
our panel, our moderator, our subject matter experts, please give them a round of applause.
Salute you all. Salute.
At this time, we have about 10 minutes. We're just running a little, not behind, we're right on time.
Right,
Let me
there
just
you
say
go.
that.
Thank you.
Everything is in divine order. That's exactly what we say as black people when we're going to do it the way we want to do it. What we're going to do is take about 1 or
Amen,
2
sister.
minutes here to take a question or two, just 1 or 2 questions for the panel, and then we're going to go ahead and enjoy a little bit of that rich taste right after this. And so I'll save my thank yous for that time. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Robert, and he's going to, invite anyone who may have a question for any of the panelists.
Mic is hot. Testing.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. K.L. Allen, Chancellor of Western Governors University. Pleasure, first of all, to be here to listen.
Okay.
Hello.
My
Hi.
question
Hello.
not being from Ohio or Dayton. When we look at going forward, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities so that way we can have actionable items to move forward?
Amaha?
Yeah, I think some of our biggest challenges is I think like we don't take the time to build the trust, right? Like we sometimes come together and we acknowledge an issue, and then 2 weeks later we already got all these full plans and this, that, and other, and we haven't built the deep relationships, and so we're not relational enough to build the trust to be able to hold the container and build the container long enough to be able to make the change. But there's so many opportunities right now. If it's criminal justice reform, housing, food, and so it's like how do we build that the relational network to enable us to have that collective impact that we're kind of in the midst of, I would say.
If I could float one action item, real quick to answer that question, I would advise, if I could, I would demand it. But that would be not to take any meeting that does not involve work. And I don't mean like, if you want to get to know, that's what LinkedIn is for. That's what social media is for. That's what email is for.
Right.
But if we meet, you are asking for my time. You are asking for my literal life and my energy. And I need that to be work. That would be my day one. Don't set up a meeting with me unless we're working.
I say.
Love that one.
One last
Oh, yeah.
question.
Okay. First of all, Scott, thank you so much for that question about the Black church, because the Black church was always the seat of power for the Black community. But right now, we have another movement going on across our country that's known as Christian nationalism, and it has permeated so many of our institutions. It's permeated our education system. We're banning books. We're telling teachers what they can and cannot teach. It has permeated our whole culture. It has made people that they want the gays to go back into the closet. They want the blacks to go back to the back of the bus. This is exactly what the agenda is. There is a politician that's running an ad right now that ends with pro-God, pro-gun. and pro-Trump.
Yeah.
Now, you know, out of all of that, God is misplaced because he doesn't have anything in common with guns and Trump.
Come on.
So what I am saying,
those are dog whistles,
is that we have to wake up. We have to, like you say, do the work. I want to let everybody know there are debates coming up. That these debates will happen at Central State University. That's a first. But these debates are to pick senators, governor, and we know who will have our interest in mind. We know that. Yeah. You have to keep a close eye on the judicial races.
Yeah.
Those judges have really come forward for us, and that's why we're having a fight right now as to how much more we're going to keep up this gerrymandering. Yeah. So my question, if anybody can help me with this, we have to get people out to vote. Yeah. How are we going to get people to wake up and make sure they're going to exercise the power that's in our hands? Because that's the only way we're going to make changes with what we're faced with today.
Yeah.
That's a point.
I think it's a great point. I think, and it's always good to see you, Mrs. Lee. I think that's a great point. I think we have to use, Ryan, you made a statement about we all have privilege, but we all have platforms. We all have circles of influence. I think it's carrying that message forward. I think one of the things that's been difficult is there is a whole movement or a whole group or a whole sentiment, I think, within the black community that, you know, I'm not going to vote because I can't trust any of them. I can't trust the whole system, you know, so on and so forth. And so we've got to engage in dialogue with folks and not just say, you're being ignorant, which I've heard from some people, but we have to engage in dialogue with folks to really see if we can move beyond that and realize that this is really your vote is your voice in this system, in this America that we live in. And so we have to access that. We have to utilize it. But I think it's twofold. It's one, sharing the message, but I think it's also what you keep saying, Scott. We've got to do the work, right? We've got to get out and register folks to vote. We've got to do voting drives. We've got to do all of that to really try and reach people door to door, wherever we are in our spaces, to really activate people to do it. That would be my answer. It's so much easier said from this seat than done. But I certainly agree with you.
And I thank you so much for that. This conversation could go on. I am a producer. I do not mind running a little late, right? But it kicks in some time. And so we do want to take one more question from the floor. But while we're taking that question, you all are going to receive your action cards. What we want from this day also is that for you all to write down one action item that you can do, that you can take away from this experience. And with that action item, Sinclair Community College and Michael Carter is going to support us. You're going to take your action item and put it in the envelope. You're going to write it to yourself. Carlos has those. He's going to pass them out. And then you're going to give that back to us with your address on it. And in 3 months, we're going to mail it to you to see if you started the process of fulfilling your action steps in the work here in the community. But we do want to take one final question, a short question. It looks like a youth, and we will and then we'll close this thing up because you guys know that you can just keep talking, right? Oh, y'all know that. Yeah. This thing should be 3 or 4 hours. It should be. But here we go.
Rodney, this can be a segment.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the esteemed panel. It was so informative, so enlightening. I may have a baby face, but I'm actually not a youth. I've been
goodness.
Practicing law for 18 years.
Looking good. You're looking good.
It's the lighting.
Gains for
You're looking fabulous.
I wanted
You're looking
to
fabulous.
piggyback off of the question about voting. Mike Muse has this wonderful 4-quadrant vote initiative talking about how voting for judges, police chief,
absolutely,
mayor,
absolutely,
police commissioner. Those are the 4 power positions that have the greatest impact on the local community.
Yep, that's true.
I just wanted to state my name. My name is Jacqueline Gaines. I'm on the ballot to be Montgomery County Common Pleas General Division Judge. We have a primary in May. It's a contested primary. I humbly ask everyone for your vote. Once again, that's Jacqueline Gaines. I do have a website. I'll be standing outside passing out literature if you want to ask me questions or talk to me. But I was wondering if I could just toss it to the panel, if you could talk about, the importance of local races and how that impacts the community. Thank you so much.
Can I say, okay.
Thank you, beautiful.
I'd like to
Thank you, you're
hop
awesome.
into that question. Uh-oh.
Oh, go ahead, Taylor. We'll piggyback
I'd
it.
like to hop in just because
Hop in.
voter engagement is something that we center on in our public policy advocacy, and at YWCA we really emphasize the need for us to recognize the needs of diversity in who we are voting for, but not only just diversity in who we're voting for, but understanding the roles that each individual plays as you are voting for each individual. And I think it is critical what the young lady just said about recognizing the need for us to vote in with these local elections of our judges and our city officials and the people who will be governing our entities like the police, and that in that space that we're also doing the research. I think a lot of times our voting community doesn't have the research or doesn't know how to do the research in order to have educated and informed votes. And we go based off of names that we've heard somewhere or
Signs you see in the yard.
superficial things that we've learned or what's been buzzing in social media, as opposed to really taking the time to research each individual and where they stand and what their priorities are as it relates to the community that you live in. And so I think that is the key to understanding the importance of your voice and the importance of voting is doing the research.
And thank you.
Taylor, I'm going to piggyback off of what Taylor said, and just because I have this bizarre combination of arts and political science, is that understanding, we have to make sure that in that education and awareness that we understand the political ecosystem, and that decisions about who is at the local level will matriculate up to the national level and vice versa. It's a two-way street. And so when we understand that concept and that construct, then we're understanding that primary elections matter. When we hear primary, we know that that's the lowest voter turnout. Okay, we have to also understand that when disenfranchisement is usually begat by a misinformation campaign and our forces that don't want you to vote in primaries for a reason. Not that you have the incapacity to vote. They don't want to. It's a game of margins. It's a game of percentages. I just feel really strongly that if we understand that, that's where education plays a big role. It plays a role in paying attention in our civics classes and not seeing them as a hassle towards our end goal. This is all interconnected. It is also for artists. It is for artists as well. Your funding, I got funded through the county. I've been funded through the county. I've seen funding processes with the NEA. That is government dollars. Those are taxpayer dollars. I, as an artist, have a responsibility as a citizen to pay attention and show up and vote in every election because it does matter. There is a value personally.
And can I just add this too? One of the things we definitely have to make sure of is when we are voting and voting wisely, voting informed, is that these votes are impacting our daily lives. What we've seen is people want to show up just for national elections, and they are important by all means, but also our local elections, as Ms. Gaines is talking about, these are people who are making decisions every day.
Every day that affect our lives.
For everything, almost everything that impacts our lives, as Rodney just said, and as Taylor was saying, it comes through some type of political action. And the key word is action, because action is a verb, not a noun. So that means we need to be
active.
Well, thank you all.
I just want to add one small piece to that real quick, if you don't mind. So when I think about local elections, and I had this conversation with my class last night, we talk about being at the table or on the menu. Voting, especially in local elections, is your way to be at the table. So for you to say who is going to be making decisions about you, because the opposite of not doing so sets up the opportunity for you to be on the menu. So that's how I look at it.
Yes.
And I got one. I know you're trying to, but if we can set the table too by what is the agenda that we're holding elected officials and people running for to run on. You know what I mean? So I think it's all part of that piece.
Just because I want to end, I'm going to say, is there anything else for the good of the community?
And I was branded
You
beast
pulled us
at every
together.
feast.
Sia. Come on now.
Until I
You
became
pulled
a
us
man.
together.
I like to end with the
So
jungle
on
queen.
behalf of the home of urban creative arts, the Dayton Metro Library, Sinclair Community College Diversity's Office, we are so appreciative of you all lending your voices, your skill set, your knowledge, your understanding, and impact on the community. We appreciate you, and please give our panel a round of applause.
Thank you.
Would you please?
Yay.
And please also give our production staff a round of applause. They were amazing.
Yes.
Shout out.
We welcome you to hang out together, not hang out, but to network, to socialize, to talk to one another, and to grab some food, please. But first, we're going to take a couple of pictures together. You guys that are online, I think that'll be cute if you just kind of stayed on in the background while we took pictures. So please hang out.